Hi everyone, and welcome to this critter tier list video where I'm going to be having a look through all of the different critters and ranking them in this tier list. I'm hoping this is going to be both entertaining and educational, so for those of you that have seen the Critter Tutorial Bite series on YouTube, in that I mainly focused on why and how to ranch the critters, and a little bit on how good they were, but not as its focus. So in this video I really want to go through all of them and hopefully give you more of an idea on which ones are really good to ranch and which ones maybe not so much, and then give you some ideas from there. And for my more experienced viewers, hopefully you might find this interesting in seeing what my opinions are on this. And of course, if you have different opinions or you disagree on anything, then let me know down in the comments and I'll be interested to read what you think as well. So without further ado, let's jump straight in, and I should quickly explain the categories I've got. So I'm going to be using S tier for the critters that are the absolute best ones in the game and my favourites. A tier for the critters that are really good, but maybe not the absolute best, but still definitely worth using. And B tier for the ones that aren't quite as good, but still have some uses, so could be useful in a base. And then C tier, ones that are okay, not good, not bad, probably wouldn't use them, but not completely terrible, because of course that's what D tier is for, the critters that are so bad I would never recommend using. And I'm going to go through each of the critters in turn. I'll look at all of the morphs at one go so we can kind of compare them. And of course if you want any specific information on the critters, then check out the relevant Critter Tutorial Bite, and I'll put the link in the card at the top. So let's jump straight in, and of course the first one is the hatch, which is a very beginner-friendly critter, very simple to ranch. All you need is a basic ranch setup, grooming station, critter drop-off, critter feeder, some way to remove the eggs, and you're all good. Now the basic hatch isn't super strong. Obviously they make coal, they eat common materials, so they're very easy to ranch, but they're not super great, particularly in the late game. So for me, I would put this off as an A tier. And I should probably say as well at this point that within my personal ratings, there will be a lot of focus on sustainability and how that works in the late game, because I tend to get to the late game fairly quickly, and having critters I can ranch forever without running out of food or be on a timer for something is definitely a bonus for me. So bear in mind that bias, your opinion might change slightly depending on where you are with your owning journey. That then brings me on to the sage hatch, which is basically the same as the hatch, although their diet is slightly different. Of course they can eat organic things. The main one in there is dirt, which is renewable, so I would say that puts the sage hatch slightly ahead of the normal hatch. And also as a note here on this tier list, I'm going to try and rank them left to right, so left is better and going down to the right, which is slightly worse but still in the same tier. So because you can feed them dirt, you can then make an infinite source of meat for barbecue, and that's pretty good. Again, they're very easy to ranch, so pretty good, but not the absolute best. Stone hatches then again are very similar, so I'm going to put them just above the sage hatch, but realistically they are basically the same from a sustainability point of view. Of course the sage hatches can eat dirt, but the stone hatches can eat igneous rock, which the hatches can't. And of course igneous rock is sustainable from volcanoes and from magma, although it's difficult to sustain a lot of them. They are still fully sustainable and pretty easy to ranch, so definitely a good critter. Okay, and that leaves us with the smooth hatch as the last hatch morph. Now in general, I really like the design of them. I think they look really cool, but their diet is a big issue. Of course, the smooth hatch eats metal ores and turns 75% of that into refined metal. Now there are two other ways to refine metal. You've got the rock crusher that gives you 50% and the metal refinery that gives you 100%. And in my opinion, it kind of loses out to these two methods. Although the rock crusher gives you less, it's much easier to run than the smooth hatch is. So for early refined metal, that's definitely the way to go. And then you can very quickly turn on the metal refinery, which gives you all the efficiency. So the smooth hatches are kind of a difficult in-between phase that don't really make much sense to me. Plus you've got the fact that the metal ores aren't sustainable, whereas the refined metals are. So in the later game you can use the metal volcanoes, so you'll never have a problem with refined metals, but you will with the metal ores. So feeding them to smooth hatches is actually kind of a problem. So for me I'm going to put them in D tier, although that might be a bit harsh. They're probably somewhere between C and D. Generally I can't recommend ranching them, there are just better solutions. I suppose the only reason you might want to do that is if you're struggling to manage the metal refinery, but you can check out my guide to plastic and steel if you want a hand with that, because it's definitely the better way to go in the long run. So that takes us on to the shine bugs, and the first one up is the normal shine bug morph. Now really most of the shine bugs are very similar, they kind of all give off light except for the abyss bug, and generally they're used for decor or for giving off light or in a shine bug reactor. Personally, I don't tend to use them that much, and also the decor becomes a problem in the Spaced Out DLC because of the radiation, so that makes them even more difficult to use. Overall then, I think I'm going to put the shine bug in the B tier because it's okay, but it's not great, and I don't really use them. I suppose it would only really be fair then to put the rest of the shine bugs in the same place. They're all very similar, so it doesn't really matter too much. But there is a bit of a difference with the last two, the Abyss Bug and the Radiant Bug. These have some unique benefits and a longer life cycle. Of course, the Radiant Bug gives off a huge amount of decor, but is very difficult to feed. So I'm actually going to put that just below the rest of the Shine Bugs. Then the Abyss Bug is difficult to place because it's better for decor because you can put them in bedrooms, but you then can't use them in Shine Bug reactors, which kind of takes away one of their main uses. So I think on balance, I'm going to put them below most of the Shine Bugs, but if you're using it for decor, you'd probably put it slightly above. Right, then on to the two Pips, and I don't think this is going to be very controversial because the Pips absolutely have to go in S tier. Not only are they a great source of renewable dirt, which is super useful, but of course they are also the only way to wild plant plants in the game. And if you guys have seen any of my streams, then you absolutely know I love to do wild planting, so these guys absolutely have to go in S tier. Then the Cuddle Pip basically has the same advantages as the Pip, except they also give hugs and can incubate eggs, which is a good benefit, but they do produce slightly less dirt, so they aren't as good for that use. And in general, I prefer feeding Pips arbortrees than feeding Cuddle Pips thimbleweed, so I'm going to put them as slightly worse, but because they can still wild plant, they are definitely in S tier. On to the Dreckos then, and we've got two morphs here, the normal Drecko and the Glossy Drecko. Now both of these are definitely very useful, and of course the base morph produces reed fibre whilst eating balm lilies. And also please forgive the fact that they are slightly cut off in the picture. Now because balm lilies are free, that means you can ranch Dreckos completely sustainably, which is definitely great, and because they make reed fibre, which is so useful for many things but particularly Atmo suits, these guys are definitely going in the S tier category. And that's not even mentioning that they also make phosphorite, which is definitely useful in a couple of things too. The Glossy Dreckos then, they meal wood, which is slightly worse because you do need a dirt supply in order to do that. And they make plastic. And personally, again, if you've seen any of my streams, you know how much I love using oil in Oni. So I tend to get plastic from the polymer press rather than using Glossy Dreckos myself. But they're definitely an easy way to do that, so they're definitely a good critter. And that's why I'm going to go put them in the top of the A category for now. On to the Pokeshell morphs, and we've got three of them, the Pokeshell, Oakshell and Sanishell. Now these of course help to make lime, lumber and cooked seafood respectively, but they all need a supply of polluted dirt in order to be able to ranch them, and that's kind of the difficult bit, at least without using a giant arbitrary farm, which is something I don't tend to do. So in general I don't use them because of that reason, but if you are using arbitraries then they're great critters to supplement that process. So I think all of these are going to go in C tier for me personally, but again, you probably could have these a bit higher if you regularly use arbitraries and lumber. So up next is on to the four Puft variants. Now these guys are all generally pretty difficult to ranch. The Puft and the Puft Prince aren't actually that bad and are the renewable source of slime in the game, but usually I never really ranch any of them, so they're going to get ranked pretty lowly here. Now the Puft and the Puft Prince work well together and are the easy two to ranch, so I'm actually going to put these guys in C tier because they're not terrible and you could do them. And I should also note that really the Puft Prince ranch is just to make puffed eggs because they have to work together. So you don't really want Puft Princes, but you have to have them to make more Pufts. Now the Dense Puft is of course a source of oxalite, but the Dense Puft and the Squeaky Puft are just two of the worst critters to ranch in the game. Because you need to stable them with one Puft Prince, they just become very difficult to manage. Now added to that, the Dense Puft only makes oxalite, which can also be made in the oxalite refinery with oxygen and gold. So your two options are either use a really simple, easy building, or ranch the most difficult critter in the game for the same output. So that's why Dense Puffs are absolutely going in the bottom of D tier. Now Squeaky Puffs definitely have the same disadvantage, but they make bleachstone. Now with the addition of the bleachstone hopper, there is now another easier way to do that, but that does require salt, which is also a bit difficult to get sustainably too. So these Squeaky Puffs are actually a good way to deal with the chlorine. So I'd say they've got one good advantage in being a good use for chlorine, but a big disadvantage in being difficult to ranch, so we're going to put them in the bottom of the C tier. Okay, and up next are all three types of Pacu. Now generally these three are very similar, the only difference really is their temperature ranges, but the key thing is they can all be starvation ranched, which is good. However, I'm now recording this video just after the Packed Snacks update, which has just broken the infinite Pacu starvation ranch. But you can still starvation ranch them, you just need to split the ranches so that they're not infinite anymore, but you've only got 9 per tile. So that means they still are a viable source of infinite free Pacu fillet, but it's more difficult to do and they take up more space. So unfortunately that change has relegated them down a bit, but I think they're all still A tier because they are still sustainable, And again, each morph is much of a muchness. It doesn't really matter which one you use, so they're basically all the same in my eyes. On to Slicksters then, and we've got the 3 morphs, and if you watch the critter tutorial bite on them, then I did say in that these are my favourite critters, so you can probably guess where these are going to end up. I think the Slickster and Molten Slickster are definitely going to end up in S tier. And hopefully that makes sense because they are the only way to use up carbon dioxide, but also produce huge amounts of meat and more oil or petroleum. So using these guys with a petroleum boiler sustains 80 Slicksters and you can get a huge amount of food in addition to power and water. And they just pair so perfectly with industrial bricks, that's why they're my favourites. Of course the Molten Slickster is better than the normal Slickster just because it makes petroleum, so that means you don't have to refine the oil that they make. But overall both of them are great and definitely my favourite critter. But that does leave one Slickster behind, the Longhair Slickster, which is the cold variant of the Slicksters. And in my mind this is more of a punishment morph to stop you from ranching them too cold, because these guys consume oxygen and just provide a little bit of decor. Now there are definitely easier ways to do decor that don't also consume oxygen. So for me these are definitely going in the bottom of D tier. I absolutely hate them and I would never use them. But I have to say that after I said that in the tutorial bite, I then got a load of comments from all of you guys that really loved the Longhair Slicksters because you somehow seem to have an excess of oxygen, which in that case, okay, maybe fair enough. If you want to use them, but I don't think I could ever objectively recommend them as a good critter, so that's why they're going where they're going. And that brings us on to Shove Vole. So we got the 2 morphs of the Shove Vole and the Delecta Vole. Now the Shove Vole was probably the strongest single critter in the game before the introduction of the Delecta Vole, because you could infinitely starvation ranch them for a whole load of free barbecue and it took literally no effort, other than grooming them of course. But the introduction of the Delecta Vole really stopped that and did introduce this idea of curried beans and tonic root, but they're just so bad for ranching, as I explained in their tutorial bite, they just really don't make any sense. But with that said, the Shove Vole and the Delecta Vole can both be minimum feed ranched, so you can still get a whole load of meat out if you do it this way and don't use a pure starvation ranch. So I think for me then, they're definitely good, but they're not the best now. Shove Voles I'm going to put into A tier for sure. And a Delecta Vole, I suppose, with the same minimum feed ranching is basically the same as a Shove Vole. But at the same time, in my mind, it was also introduced to punish the Shove Vole ranching. So that kind of makes me a bit biased to put them a bit lower. But objectively, they can be run the same as Shove Vole, so I suppose I should put them together. They're basically equivalent. Although I would never recommend using them for tonic root. Next up, the Gassy Moo, which also got a rework in one of the recent updates in the Song of the Moo update. Now before that, they were absolutely terrible and definitely would have gone in D tier, because you had to go to very long lengths to get them, and then they basically did nothing. They produce natural gas, but not enough to power the plants that they need, but now they fortunately do have the added benefit of making brackine, as well as the change to their reproduction, which means that they come from space, so you can kind of ranch them in a normal way. So they do produce something, but it's just really not great. So the brackine is kind of useful, so I think that means I'm going to put them in the bottom of B tier. But they're definitely not the best critters by a long stretch. Then on to the Morbs that make polluted oxygen for completely free. Now they don't make a lot of polluted oxygen, so you do need quite a lot of them, particularly at triple speed because they make less on the higher game speeds. So really getting them to work for you is quite difficult because you need to spawn a lot of them. But that said, they actually have no downsides, they just make polluted oxygen. And really the main challenge is getting enough of them to be useful. So that means I think I'm going to put them in the top of B tier because they definitely have a use. And we're getting close to the end now, but we've got 3 Plug Slug morphs to have a look at. Of course the base morph makes power, the Smog Slug pumps gases, and the Sponge Slug pumps liquids. Now overall I think these are a very limited use. Really here the base Plug Slug morph is the best one, and you can also use the Starvation Ranch to get a bit more power out of them. Definitely the change a little while ago to add refined metal to their diets as well as metal ores was a huge boost, because before that I probably would have put them all in D tier because of how difficult it is to get metal ores, but they can now be fed sustainably, and I suppose it's just a question of what do you want to get out of them. So the power and the hydrogen they make is nice, but it's not great, and I think the Plug Slug should go into B tier. And that leaves the Smog Slug and the Sponge Slug. Now I ran the numbers on those in the tutorial bites, and the problem is compared to a gas pump or a liquid pump, they just aren't very impressive. You're saving very little power, you're having to do awkward ranching to get basically no benefit when you can just put a machine down and be done with it. So I've got to be honest, I don't think I would ever use these 2 variants, and the uses they do have are so niche that it's just unlikely to come up. So for me, unfortunately, I think they have to go in D tier, even though they do look quite cool, they're just not very useful. Okay, and on to the Sweetle and Grubgrub, the 2 Divergents. Of course, these are only found in the Spaced Out DLC, and I probably should have said that the Plug Slugs, these Divergents, and the Beeta are all only found in the Spaced Out DLC, so if you're playing in the base game, don't worry if you can't find them. And the Sweetle and Grubgrub work with sulfur and sucrose, as well as the grub fruit plants that live in their biome. Now, because of the synergy with the plants and the fact that the Grubgrubs can give Grubgrub rubs to plants to make them grow quicker, these are definitely useful critters, and the fact that they only eat sulfur is generally a good thing, because sulfur is easily made renewably from sulfur geysers, and also if you've got a sour gas boiler going, you've got a huge amount of sulfur there. So they make meat, they help plants, and they're easily sustainable. I would definitely say they're going to A tier then, but the Sweetle is probably worse than the Grubgrub, just because the Grubgrub rubs are worth 50% bonus, and the Sweetles are only worth 5. But overall, pretty strong critters. That leads us on to the last one, which is the Beeta. Now these little guys work around hives and refine uranium ore into enriched uranium for nuclear reactors. So how useful these are kind of depends on whether you're using nuclear reactors or not. If you're not using them, then they basically have no use. But nuclear reactors are great, and they give you a huge amount of power and nuclear waste, which can be used for ramp bolts. So because nuclear reactors are pretty good, I think the Beeta definitely gets a good score because of that. Now you have to also keep in mind that they're fully sustainable. They don't lay eggs, they just spawn from the hives as long as they're fed, and they're not really ranched in the typical sense, kind of like the Morb. So they're very low effort for a decent output. I would say then they go in A tier just below the Grubgrub, and that brings me to the end of the full list. So taking us from the most useful critters, the Slicksters, the Pips and the Dreckos, all the way down to the useless ones, the Smog Slug, Sponge Slug, Smooth Hatch, Dense Puft and Longhair Slickster. Overall I think this feels about right. I'm quite happy with the list, and hopefully this might give you a bit of an idea of what you might want to go and ranch in your game. Of course I'd definitely love to hear your thoughts, and I'm sure some of you are probably screaming at the screen right now that I should change something, so let me know what you think down in the comments. If you've got any more questions on why I've put the critters in this order, or about the critters themselves, then you can also ask me here, or check out the Critters Tutorial Bite playlist that I linked earlier. Well, I hope this gives you some help in choosing which critters to ranch, and I'll leave it there. So thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.